In the previous video, Dr. Tomlinson described the second step in the differentiation process, making personal connections with students. In this video, Dr. Tomlinson will continue her explanation of that process by focusing on the last step of building a caring community. As you will learn, this community of learners establishes the framework for a responsive classroom in which students are responsible for their own growth and for supporting the growth of others. In a differentiated classroom community, all students get what they need to succeed. And now, Dr. Tomlinson.
So I want to look briefly now at the third piece. I believe that our mindset really impacts our desire and willingness to connect with kids. And that then our ability to connect with individual kids is our pathway to building a sense of community in a classroom. And again, both from research and our experience in the classroom, teaching where kids feel like a community instead of that through the cracks book where they're sitting there isolated from each other creates an energy for teaching and learning that's just awfully hard to underestimate. I taught next door to Annie for several years. We taught 7th graders, and she was so fascinating for me to watch. She built community with the notion that you had to be different to belong. And the reason she did that was that 7th graders, at least in our school, were so prone to want to do everything like everybody else. And it means that if you have kids you hang around with that don't like school, you have to not like school, you have to wear the same color they wear, you can't do your paper any differently than anybody else. And yet I think 7th graders want to be unique people. And so what she did was build a community of different people. And it was the neatest thing the way she could do that. It gave them the bond. But to sort of be a member of that club, you had to be you instead of trying to be somebody else. Fascinating different ways to build community, but the kids loved her class. And they valued that sense of individuality that she tried to build with them and yet could lean on each other in that process. Michael Fullen, who writes a lot about change in schools, says that a thing that we're finding out now in cognitive psychology and in sociology is showing us how motivation and relationships are inextricably intertwined. And he goes on to say that it's only when schooling operates in a way that connects students relationally in relevant, engaging, and worthwhile experience that substantial learning will occur. And that has several parts. He says you have to have the kids connect with each other, but not in a beach club. They need to connect with each other around meaningful work that really drives them forward in that direction. And that's what's necessary for substantial learning, kids coming together around a goal that strikes them as worthwhile. And he goes on to say the fact that such a small proportion of our students in school feel that sense of unity moving together towards something exciting shows us what a big problem we have. And again, what these guys are finding over and over is that connections with humans around meaningful stuff is what makes learning happen. Not that we covered it harder, not that they sat still, but that there are relationships going on in that. Building community in a differentiated classroom is particularly important, I think. It establishes the fact that together as a team, as one of your colleagues said yesterday, we have to help each other accomplish this stuff. It builds sort of that tone and direction. And what that means is that the kids come to understand that every kid has a next step to take. There's no kid who doesn't have a next step to take today. And the goal is not to worry about what somebody's next step is, it's to make sure everybody takes their next step. It means that we have responsibility for our own growth because we have to know what our next step is, work with the teacher to get there, but we also in a community want to have that we've got your back mentality. Not only am I seeing to my success, but I'm willing to support you in your success. And if you're struggling with something, I want to help you with that. If something great has just happened for you, I want to be a part of acknowledging that. The notion of community helps us begin to work with that really important idea that we need to compete with ourselves, not with somebody else. When you start competing with each other, you have a set of preordained winners and a set of preordained losers. If you're competing against yourself, everybody can grow. It helps us begin to understand that fair doesn't mean we're treated alike. It means we're all treated with respect and with a support system that helps us get where we need to. And it really helps us work with the notion that we're colleagues in this, and that colleagues who really support one another have intelligent ways of working together that support people's work, not detract from it. Community in a classroom begins with teachers' mindset, and then if I believe in individual kids, I think kids see that and they begin to believe in each other better when they see me believe in them. Community supports the notion that we can't succeed as a class unless we're all growing and succeeding. It's not okay for 6 of us to look great and the others of us to be asleep. It ensures security and safety necessary for academic growth because we are pulling together as a team. It enables students to work as a team. And a really important feature in a differentiated classroom is that a sense of community gives the teacher teammates also. You've got kids who are trying to help the teacher figure out how to make the class work better, and everybody doing the work that needs to be done in the room together, not the teacher trying to do everything. I want to ask you now to look with me at a video clip for a second. It's a really short one, and it's a high school English teacher who's working with a literacy notion of encouraging high school students to write, which happens in high school classes across the country every day. It's kind of an interesting class, though. If I played this for you without any sound, and we looked at the kids in here, for many of us, that sort of subtle, subconscious mindset of who can succeed and who can't, and the messages we get about that just might kick in. This is an urban classroom, and all of the kids in it are on free lunch. Every kid's a free lunch student. They're all African American and Hispanic, and for the most part, they're high school kids who've hated school for a lot of years. And here this poor high school teacher inherits them. And it would be an awfully easy place for it to be a classroom of kids who can't succeed, and they know it, and the teacher can't. What I want you to look at in here and see is to look at and see where the teacher is with her students on some sort of journey from mindset to connections to community. And kind of ask yourself, what's her mindset, and is that part working? Do you think she's connecting with kids or not? She might have the mindset and the connections, but no community. Where is she on that journey? What's her mindset, and what evidence do you have? Do you think she connects with the kids, and on what evidence would you say yes or no? What evidence do you have here that her connections or lack of connections impacts student work? Because again, that's the goal. It's not about social work, it's about academic success. And what evidence do you see that community exists in this class, and why would you say that it does or it does not? And what would change in the class if your answers were the opposite of the ones you give? In other words, if you think she's weak in an area, what would be helped if she got stronger? If she's strong in a particular facet of that mindset to connections to community piece, what would happen if that went away? Very brief little section, but let's take a look here and see what you think about her.
Strategy is journaling. Tracy Wagner has students keep journals in her writing class at Charlestown High School in Boston. Every Friday, she gives her students a chance to connect their journaling activity to their personal interests.
Everyone looks forward to Writer's Friday. I bring in a kind of poetry or a model of a short story.
Today the choice I'm going to show you is called writing a two-person perspective poem. So let's review a little. What does the word perspective mean? Who knows? Danielle, thank you.
Point of view.
It's like a point of view.
What you think about it?
I present a really brief lesson, which is a choice that they'll have for the day.
Think about the ideas, the organization, the voice, the word choice, the sentence fluency, right? How the punctuation is on the end, the long and the short, and the conventions of the poem. But you know, in here we're reading the poem like a writer to figure out how it's written. How many people are saying this poem? 2. How do we know that? Who can tell me? How do we know? Alexis.
Because one's in regular light text and the other one's in bold text.
Fantastic. And then the bulk of class is writing time, where I believe students should have a choice of things to write. It's a time that they can depend on in which to express themselves about something that may have happened that week. It's a little bit more relaxed. You can write in the 2-person perspective poetry style. I'd love to see that. Or you can write something else today if that moves you. That's fine. I was curious when I decided to do this to see who they would choose to represent in the poem. And I was interested that a lot of the boys chose fathers and sons, my knowing that their fathers aren't a big part of their lives. A lot of the poems are very autobiographical. There's one girl who put herself in the perspective of a family member that she's been having a lot of internal conflicts about. And it's also always remarkable to me, and I've had them for 2 years now, how quickly they are able to just get right into it, write something, be proud of it, and want to share it. And we've worked very hard on that. About 5 more minutes. Then the last 10 to 15 minutes of class are sharing.
I am a boy. I am a boy. I'm a boy born as a crack baby. I'm a boy born to a wealthy lady. I'm a boy that grew up tough. I'm a boy that never had it rough. I'm a boy that lived the street life. I'm a boy that lived the sheltered life. I'm a boy that's hip to the beat. I'm a boy that can't go dancing without tripping over my feet. I'm a boy. I'm a boy. I'm a boy that went to the store and kept it bold. I'm a boy that drank hot chocolate when it was cold. I'm a boy who decided I wanted a new life. I'm a boy who became a statistic to peer pressure and started carrying a knife. I'm a boy who wanted to change. I'm a boy that is doing 15 in life in a day.
When I first met them last year, they would never call themselves writers, ever. They were very hesitant to read anything out loud. And so this has been a year and a half now of really working on this level of confidence and writing ability. They are very good writers.
That kind of journal.
What do you suppose her class was like 2 years ago when she walked in there on the first day? Yeah, you can just imagine, again, that sinking feeling in the pit of your stomach with a teacher where you know you're a captive audience with kids for 180 days and nobody wants to be there. And the chances are some of them don't want to be there in a loud way. I don't know which is worse, when they fight you overtly or they just sit there like tree stumps. But in any case, that would be a class where you think as a teacher, not much going to happen here. They're angry, they don't want to be here. What do you think her mindset was? Growth or fixed? How do you know that?
From the point that she was at, after a year and a half, they're willing to share, they're willing to work. They were all responding to her, and she had to work on that. But I don't think from day one she went in there and said, these kids can't do it at all. I don't think that her mindset was like that at all, not even from the beginning.
Because I don't think if her mindset had been that way from the beginning that she'd have gotten to where she is. She started with the assumption that they were going to write like college prep students, and they were going to use that rubric that's rigorous on the screen, and that was the destination, and the job was to work to get there. If you wait for them to change and decide they want to get there and then start working with them, I don't think you ever get there. Yeah. What else do you think about her mindset? What's your thinking, your evidence? Yeah.
You mentioned yesterday the bridge that is so necessary. So here she created an opportunity, carving time for the children to express themselves. Not necessarily something that might have been the curriculum or scope and sequence, but allowing the students that opportunity to grow. identifying and creating those relationships. And may I add that physical environment, not sterile at all, looking at the student work that was posted, it makes you want to be there. There was a sense of belonging. It came alive. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, we don't have a lot of evidence. It's very short, but you can really pick up a lot. That rubric, that list of things they're supposed to do, is a high expectations thing. Their work on the wall is mounted in a serious way, and you can tell their work has been spotlighted and is used, for some instructional purposes in there. And although I'd love to see what the 2 years looked like on a video, how she moved with them on the first day and the second day and the third day, I can guarantee you she started off with the notion of success in mind. And that's what she went toward, not maintenance or let's keep the lid on or nobody hit anybody this hour so it must be an okay class. I think she started marching toward that goalpost very quickly. So I think you've got enough evidence of that fluid mindset, not the least of which is she got where she got, yeah. What about her connections with kids? Do you get anything about her connecting? What do you think?
Well, a couple of things that struck me. First of all, you said that the majority of the students were free and reduced meal students. And it was a predominantly African American class, and she was a white teacher. And I think some of the things that struck me was the fact that she had created such a safe environment for those students to where the connections where they felt so safe to be able to share those deep things about themselves, not only with her, but with the students. And no one was disrespectful. And so I would assume then that part of her expectations were that this is going to be a respectful classroom. We are going to respect each other's work and how we feel. And I think she overcame some cultural barriers, too, in a lot of ways, the race and socioeconomic barriers. I think she was able to transcended their traditional thoughts of what those kids could do.
It's incredibly important that African American students have African American teachers, and that Hispanic students have Hispanic teachers, and that girls have some women teachers that model for them. But the truth is, you're not restricted to the cultural identity with yourself. I have a friend who works a lot, a white friend who works a lot with African American kids in Chapel Hill, North Carolina, and they forever say to him, he'll say something that relates to culture or to blackness, and I've heard them say to him many times, "Gee, you're the blackest person in this school." And his skin's as white as mine. It doesn't have to do with the fact that the pigment matches. It has to do with the fact that he respects and knows their culture, and he learns from them as much as they learn from him. And they see that happening, that they're teaching him at the same time. And so I think here, it's not that it may be that they came in with a little bit of extra suspicion of a white teacher, but I don't think it probably took her too long to give the message, I'm looking at kids who are smart and are going to be writers, and that's where we're headed, and let's go. I think the connection piece, that she knows what they're writing about and understands which kids are having difficulty with family members and which boys really want to think about and write about their fathers and why that might be significant, giving them the choice, squatting down over their papers as they write to be able to talk with them for a minute or two here and there. I think there's ample evidence that she connects to them as human beings, that she's learning from them, that she sees them as worthwhile in her room. I like that little clip because it's so short, but it says a lot. There is no reading program. There is no textbook. There is no pacing guide. There is no set of instructional strategies that can substitute for a teacher's belief in kids and connection with kids. We spend a ton of money trying to get the right reading program. We spend a ton of money making sure everybody's got that pacing guide and is on the right page. That is never, ever, ever going to replace what that teacher is to those students. That's the thing that's going to make the difference for us, not that piece of material. Okay, second big principle after the mindset connections community principle. And this is a tough one for us in literacy-related issues, too, sometimes. I think all the way K through 12, as far as literature and English and grammar and writing and those sorts of things are concerned, maybe not so much when literacy is embedded in science or math, but it really matters that differentiation happens in the context of good curriculum? You have to differentiate something. And if you differentiate a set of dry skills, you've found 4 different ways to deliver dry skills. And if you start to teach and you're covering something, but you're not quite sure what the significance of it is, and it's kind of foggy, you've created multiple pathways through the fog. So it really matters that we ask ourselves, what's the point of this curriculum? What are we really trying to do here? Not how do I differentiate first, but what is it I'm trying to differentiate? I have a couple of colleagues, Marcia being one of them, who will work with folks on developing curriculum and sort of look at what the teacher has put on paper. And this it happens to me. I do this to myself a lot of the time, so it's not like looking at other people and not looking in. But you'll look at something and say, so could you tell me why that lesson's important? Could you tell me what the point of that is? Could you tell me kind of why you think a kid would want to learn that? And if you're being honest, you have to say, I don't really have a clue. and if you start to differentiate that, you've got some issues. Here's what we know about how curriculum either contributes to or detracts from learning. You and I will be successful, and our kids will be successful with learning if 2 things happen in our classes. One is we engage the kids. We get their attention. Even if they don't want to listen to us, it's interesting enough or puzzling enough so they have to. They can't quite drift away from what we were saying. We hook their minds. And the second is they understand when we finish how the thing works. They see why it matters. They see how it works. They can use it someplace. They can transfer it. They can apply it. They can modify it. These are the 2 gold standards for us. And we ought to every day be saying, how did I do with engagement? Not for the class as a whole, but for individuals in the class. It's not good enough to say the class liked it today, when in fact 5 kids were asleep around the edges. What was happening for each kid engagement-wise? And not did they memorize stuff and can they hand it back, but can they talk about this? Can they explain how it works? Can they compare it and contrast it to something else? Do they see why it's put together the way it is? Engagement happens with these sorts of things. These are the kinds of attributes of classwork or of curriculum that make kids want to stick with us. Which of these do you think might have been working with those kids who were seated at their tables writing so diligently like it was the most important thing in town? Emotional connection. What else? Personal relevance, yeah. Could be a passion thing, something somebody's really hyper about in a good way or a bad way. Yeah. They had a choice. They had a choice. So she's got at least 3 things kicking in up there. And I think you could make an argument that there's a product focus too, because they're creating a real thing for a real audience that they're going to get to share with that audience. So she really has multiple hooks for engagement going for her and for them in there. I love this drawing. Gary Larson is such a weird man, and having taught 13-year-olds for a long time, I just always project what it must have been like to have Gary Larson at 13. I just can't imagine. But Witch is looking at these little kids go to the gingerbread house, and she says, dang, Zelda seems to attract all the little kids. And the caption under it, be sure you kind of look here, the caption under it says, later, Edna was forced to sell her Brussels sprouts house. I hate to tell you guys, but a lot of times now we're trying to sell Brussels sprouts, and the world is full of gingerbread houses. They're called iPods and cell phones and friends and movies and malls and comic books and whatever else it is that draws that kid. If we would use those things, and you have a great opportunity with literacy to use the new literacies that kids love so much, to engage them with reading, but we're still trying to sell Brussels sprouts. I can tell you many hours that I stood in front of a class trying to make conjunctions exciting. Conjunctions are an uphill battle. They just really are. And if reading is all about phonemes and, you know, sounds and that kind of stuff, and it's not to read that book, one of the things that's wonderful about your story with the kids bringing in their favorite books is that the joy of the story was there. Not how do you decode it and how do you put all these pieces together, but listen to the weird sounds and how cool this is and what a funny thing happens at the end. This is a tough climb for us, and we could spend the whole 3 days in all of our sessions on it, and none of us would probably be too far down the pike with it because the thinking is very challenging for us, but it's worth following. Wiggins and McTighe say that if we look at research-based teaching and learning and what we see in a classroom, this is how we ought to organize our curriculum. And unfortunately, nobody does this for us in most places. So we're left as teams and individuals to figure it out for ourselves. But in the center of everything ought to be what we want kids to understand about what we're teaching them. And then just beyond that, we need to ask ourselves, what is the knowledge and what is the skill that kids have to come away with in order to be able to really wrap around these understandings? What words do they have to know in order to really understand? What skills do they have to be able to use that knowledge and that understanding? And Wiggins and McTighe would say, and they're right about this, by the way, they didn't make this up. They drew this from what we know about teaching and learning and how that happens. If you want a really great reference book to read on something like that, look at the book called How People Learn. It's actually probably the most potent textbook on book on teaching and learning that has existed in the last 10 or 20 years. Brings together all that we know, focuses a lot on math and science, if any of you are math and science folks, but it really has to do with learning across all areas, and Wiggins and McTighe have drawn heavily on that. This, they say, should be our curriculum, understandings at the core, and knowledge and skill that kids will bring to bear on those understandings. What do you guys mostly in literacy find yourself teaching? Big understandings, knowledge, or skill? Skill. It's gotten to be a very skill-driven field. And what that turns out to be like is somebody said, hey, I tell you what, you teach kids to hammer for 10 years. And then somebody says, how about building a house? And the kid goes, I know how to do that. They know how to hammer, but they don't see what it's for, and they have no transfer for it. So it leaves us a big gap, a need for ourselves to say, what's the point of this stuff that I'm teaching, and how do I help the kids see it? Wiggins and McTighe say also there's other stuff in this darker circle out here, and that's more knowledge and skills that would be nice to know if you had plenty of time, but there isn't enough time for all of them. And so what Wiggins and McTighe would say is, make this your curriculum. And if kids truly understand what they're doing, and if they have this knowledge and skill that interfaces with those understandings, they'll do much better on a standardized test because they can reason. And they see how things are working, as opposed to if you'd spent all your time here and here, and they don't understand how anything comes together. I'm maybe a little more cowardly than they are, probably because I spent more time in a classroom. What I probably would do would be in a month-long unit to spend 3 weeks here and then spend the last week trying to beat the bejeebers out of these other things so that I know the kids have had some chance to get there. But here's what you find. If the kids are solid here, this comes much more easily to them because there's something for it to hang on to.
As Dr. Tomlinson explained, a caring classroom community not only involves positive connections between teachers and students, it should also include positive connections among the students themselves. In the next video, Dr. Tomlinson observes that our educational system is producing what she calls a generation of stoplight readers, and should instead be producing a new generation of flashlight readers. You will learn what she means in the next lesson.